Every crime is a wound on the world. We're here to dissect it, layer by layer, to find the truth buried within. This is Anatomy of Crime. The woods of northeast Philadelphia have their own language. It's a quiet dialect, spoken in the rustle of winterbarre branches and the damp chill that clings to the low ground long after the sun has risen. In the winter of 1957, these woods, a patch of undeveloped land in the Fox Chase neighborhood, were a liminal space. They were the city's forgotten edge, a place where the neat grid of suburban streets frayed into something wilder. It was a place people went to dump things they no longer wanted. Rusted-out car parts, broken furniture, the general detritus of life that you wanted to disappear. But in February of that year, someone used this anonymous patch of earth to discard something far more precious and far more terrible. They left behind a secret nestled inside a cardboard box. The secret was first glimpsed by a student from nearby LaSalle College. It was February 24th, a Sunday. He was checking on the muskrat traps he had set in the woods, a routine task on a cold day. He saw the box first. It was large, the kind that might hold a small appliance or, as it would turn out, a store-bought bassinet. He paid it little mind. Dumping was common here. A few days later, he passed by again. The box was still there, its cardboard sides now softened by the damp air. Curiosity, or perhaps a faint, nagging unease, got the better of him. He nudged the box open. What he saw inside sent a jolt of ice through his veins. He saw the pale, still form of a small child. He didn't report it. He was a college student, and the cultural fear of the police, the instinct to not get involved in something so dark and complex, was overwhelming. He kept the secret, letting it fester in his mind as he walked away, leaving the boy alone in the woods once more. Days continued to pass. The secret lay waiting. On February 25th, a Monday, a young motorist named Frederick Benones was driving along Susquehanna Road when he saw a rabbit dart into the underbrush. An animal lover, he pulled his car over, hoping to get a better look. He walked into the woods, and that's when he too saw the box. This time there was no turning away. He approached it cautiously, his shoes crunching on the frozen leaves. The lid was askew. He peered inside, and his world tilted on its axis. Nestled in a worn plaid flannel blanket was the body of a small boy. He was naked, his pale skin a stark contrast to the decaying earth around him. His arms were carefully crossed over his chest, his small hands folded almost peacefully. But there was no peace here. There was only the profound, silent violence of a life cut short, and a body abandoned. Frederick Benones ran back to his car and drove until he found a telephone. The secret was finally out. The discovery of the boy in the box marked the beginning of one of America's most haunting and enduring mysteries. For more than 6 decades, he would be a ghost, a nameless face on a flyer, a tragic question mark in the heart of Philadelphia. An army of investigators would dedicate their lives and their retirements to finding his name. Theories would bloom like poison ivy in those woods, twisting around stories of shadowy foster homes, illicit families, and brutal hidden crimes. But for 65 years, the central truth remained locked away. Who was this child, and who had thrown him away like so much trash? This is not just the story of a cold case. It is the story of a ghost hunt, a relentless, multi-generational refusal to let a child remain an enigma. Today, on Anatomy of Crime, we dissect the anatomy of an identity stolen by murder, buried by time, and finally, miraculously, resurrected by science. When the Philadelphia police arrived at the scene that cold February afternoon, they stepped into a puzzle box of their own. The physical evidence was both plentiful and maddeningly unhelpful. Led by veteran detective Elmer Palmer, The crime scene unit began a meticulous examination of the area. The box itself was quickly identified. It was from a J.C. Penney store, and the markings indicated it had originally contained a cradelet bassinet, priced at $7.95. An immediate check with J.C. Penney revealed that this model was sold exclusively in their stores in the Upper Darby and Chelton Hills areas of suburban Philadelphia. It was a geographic clue, but a frustratingly broad one. Tens of thousands of these bassinets had been sold. The box was carefully dusted for fingerprints, but yielded nothing usable. Its rain-softened surface had wiped away any trace of the person who left it there. Inside, the boy was wrapped in a cheap, faded blanket. It was a distinctive Southwestern or Native American pattern, but it was old, worn, and commercially produced. It offered no clues. The scene was meticulously processed, but the woods held their secrets close. There were no discernible footprints other than those of Frederick Benoni's, no tire tracks that could be definitively linked to the crime, no discarded weapon, no stray fibers or hairs that didn't belong to the boy himself. The killer had been as clean as they were cruel. The entire operation had the chilling air of a deliberate, careful disposal. The focus shifted immediately to the victim himself. He was transported to the Philadelphia Medical Examiner's office, where an autopsy would attempt to give him a voice. The pathologist, Dr. Joseph Spellman, determined he was between 4 and 6 years old. He was small for his age, standing about 40 inches tall and weighing only 30 pounds, placing him clinically in the category of failure to thrive. His body told a story of profound and chronic neglect. He was severely malnourished, with the telltale signs of a wasted frame, atrophied muscles, a distended belly, and ribs clearly visible beneath his pale skin. Yet paradoxically, he also showed signs of recent, if rudimentary care. His fingernails and toenails were clean and neatly trimmed. His light brown, almost blonde hair had been recently cut in a crude, choppy style. Small tufts of his shorn hair still clung to his wet body, a crucial detail suggesting the haircut happened right around the time of his death, perhaps even after he had been bathed or submerged in water. It was a bizarre and unsettling contradiction, the meticulous grooming of a child who was otherwise wasting away. His body was a road map of faint scars, each one a potential clue to his past. A 7-inch surgical scar ran down the outside of his left ankle, evidence of a significant medical procedure at some point in his short life. He had 3 small, curious L-shaped scars on his groin, each about a 1/4 inch long. Another circular scar, a healed puncture, was found on his left elbow. Investigators were certain these distinctive marks would be the key. Surely a child who had undergone surgery would have a medical record. Surely a doctor or a nurse would recognize the description. The cause of death was determined to be multiple blows to the head, blunt force trauma delivered with savage force. The bruising on his face and body confirmed a brutal, violent end. Dr. Spellman also noted a detail that would fuel speculation for decades. The boy's hands and the soles of his feet were pale and deeply wrinkled, a clear sign of prolonged immersion in water shortly before or after his death. Was he drowned in a bathtub? Was he cleaned after the murder? It was another strange piece of the puzzle, a detail that defied easy explanation. The Philadelphia Police Department, under the direction of Captain John Ryan, launched one of the most extensive investigations in the city's history. In an era before computers, DNA, and centralized databases, this meant painstaking manual police work. They believed, with a confidence that would soon curdle into frustration, that identifying the boy would be a simple matter of days, perhaps weeks. A child this young doesn't simply vanish without a trace. They began by printing 400,000 flyers bearing the boy's image. These were not the crisp digital prints of today, but grainy black and white images run off on printing presses. 2 images were used. One was a post-mortem photograph of him as he was found, his face heartbreakingly peaceful in death. The other was a retouched version, an artist's attempt to show what he might have looked like in life, with his eyes open, a hint of a smile on his lips. These flyers were plastered in every conceivable public space: police stations, post offices, liquor stores, and community centers across the Delaware Valley. The story was picked up by newspapers from coast to coast. The face of the unknown boy stared out from the pages of the Philadelphia Inquirer and the Daily News, his story sent out over the Associated Press wire service, a silent plea for someone, anyone, to claim him. The public response was overwhelming. Thousands of tips poured into the homicide division, each one meticulously recorded on an index card, each one representing a thread of hope, but each thread led nowhere. Investigators cross-referenced the boy's description with every reported missing child in the United States. There were no matches. His distinctive scars and the record of his ankle surgery were sent to every hospital in the region and beyond. No institution had a record of a patient fitting his description. They checked the records of orphanages, foster homes, and child welfare agencies. He was a ghost in the system. In a move that was unprecedented for its time, the police department worked with the city to have the flyer inserted into every single gas bill mailed to Philadelphia residents. Nearly 500,000 homes received the boy's image directly. Still, nothing. Not a single credible lead emerged. The boy remained stubbornly, maddeningly anonymous. After all leads were exhausted, the city prepared for his burial. The investigators of the 23rd Detective Division, men who had seen the worst of humanity, were so moved by the case that they passed a hat among themselves. They collected enough money to purchase a small casket and a simple headstone for a plot in the city's Potter's Field. The stone read, "Heavenly Father, bless this unknown boy." On July 24, 1957, he was laid to rest, his identity still a complete mystery. For the police and for the city, it was a profound failure. But for a few of those investigators, it was not an ending. It was the beginning of a lifelong obsession. The initial flurry of investigation eventually subsided, but the case file was never relegated to a dusty shelf in a records room. It became a quiet obsession for a select few, a stone in the shoe of the Philadelphia law enforcement community. Chief among these dedicated souls was Remington Bristow, a young, driven investigator from the medical examiner's office. For Bristow, this was more than just another unsolved case. From the moment he saw the boy's small body, it became a personal crusade. He worked the case relentlessly for decades. Long after his official retirement in 1983, he became the unofficial keeper of the boy's memory, the self-appointed guardian of a ghost. The case files lived with him, not in an office, but in his home. He spent thousands of dollars of his own money chasing down leads that others had abandoned, traveling to other states on the thinnest of hunches. He would call detectives at all hours, convinced he had a new angle, a fresh piece of information that would finally break the case open. Bristow's obsession led him down a path that would define the case for half a century. Early in the investigation, a psychic from New Jersey had contacted police, claiming to have had a vision of a house, a foster home, where the boy had lived and died. While most seasoned investigators would dismiss such a claim, Bristow, in his desperation, was willing to listen. The psychic's description led him to a foster home located just 1.5 miles from where the body was found. The home was run by a man named Arthur Nicoletti and his family. The initial investigation into the home in 1957 yielded nothing concrete. But Bristow never let it go. In 1960, years after the home had closed, he learned of an estate sale being held on the property. He went himself, wandering through the remnants of other people's lives. In the sale, he made a discovery that electrified him. He found a bassinet that was strikingly similar to the J.C. Penney model that had been sold in the box. He also found blankets that bore a resemblance to the one wrapped around the boy. For Bristow, this was the smoking gun. He developed a detailed theory. The boy was the illegitimate child of Nicoletti's stepdaughter. His death had been an accident, perhaps a fall or an act of discipline that went too far. Fearing scandal and the ruin of their foster care business, the family had covered it up. He imagined them cutting the boy's hair to alter his appearance, wrapping him in a familiar blanket, placing him in the bassinet box they had on hand, and driving him to the nearby woods under the cover of darkness. It was a plausible narrative. It explained the proximity of the home to the dump site. It provided a powerful motive for the concealment of the death. But it was entirely circumstantial. There was no direct evidence, no confession, no witness who would come forward. The family members were questioned repeatedly over the years, but they steadfastly denied any involvement. Without more, the theory remained just that, a compelling yet unprovable ghost story. Remington Bristow pursued it until his death in 1993, leaving behind boxes and boxes of meticulously organized files, a legacy of tenacious, unyielding dedication to a boy he never knew. The case was passed down like a grim inheritance from one generation of detectives to the next. But as the decades wore on, new leads were scarce. The boy in the box became a piece of Philadelphia folklore, a local tragedy that refused to fade. Then, in 2002, nearly 45 years after the boy was found, a new and startling theory emerged, one that seemed to blow the case wide open. A woman, a respected professional who lived in Cincinnati, contacted Philadelphia investigators. For the sake of her privacy, she was given the pseudonym M. Her story, which she relayed to seasoned homicide sergeant Tom Augustine, was chilling, detailed, and disturbingly credible. She claimed that in the summer of 1954, her physically and emotionally abusive mother had traveled from their home in the Philadelphia suburbs to a farmer's market. There, M. claimed, her mother purchased a young boy named Jonathan from his impoverished itinerant parents. The boy, M. said, was brought to live in their home, a place of terror and violence. For the next 2.5 years, M. alleged, the boy was subjected to horrific physical and sexual abuse at the hands of her mother. According to M., the end came one evening in February 1957. The boy had eaten a bowl of baked beans and had vomited. Her mother, a woman with a volatile temper, flew into a rage. She grabbed the boy and slammed his head against the floor repeatedly, beating him until he was unconscious, in a detail that resonated powerfully with the original autopsy findings. M. said her mother then gave the boy a bath, during which he was either already dead or died. His lifeless body was left in the water for some time. After the murder, M. described how her mother, in a panic, cut the boy's distinctive long blondish hair in a crude, hurried attempt to alter his appearance. The detail of the haircut performed after he was wet perfectly matched the evidence of the shorn hair found clinging to the boy's body and the wrinkled condition of H.'s skin noted by Dr. Spellman. The story continued with a ghastly account of the cover-up. M. claimed that she was forced to help her mother. They put the boy's naked body in the trunk of their car. They drove to the Fox Chase area, a place her mother knew from her childhood. There they found the discarded bassinet box. They wrapped Jonathan's body in a plaid blanket from their home and placed him inside. They left him in the woods, driving away from the secret they had buried in the cold earth. The level of detail in M.'s account was stunning. She described the boy, the abuse, the murder, and the disposal of the body with a clarity that investigators found incredibly compelling. So many of the esoteric details aligned with the known facts of the case. The timing, the cause of death, the haircut, the water immersion. For a moment, it seemed the 45-year-old mystery was finally solved. However, as detectives dug deeper, serious problems began to emerge. M. had a documented history of severe mental illness, which didn't automatically discredit her story, but it did necessitate a much higher level of independent corroboration. Investigators brought M. to Philadelphia, and she led them to the house where she claimed the abuse and murder had taken place. They canvassed the old neighborhood. One neighbor, when shown the post-mortem photograph of the boy, remarked with a jolt of recognition that he looked like a boy who used to play in the street, a boy who had lived in that very house, and then, one day, had simply disappeared. It was a tantalizing piece of anecdotal evidence, but it wasn't proof. Despite extensive efforts, police could find no independent corroboration for the core elements of her story. They couldn't find any record of a boy named Jonathan living at that address. They couldn't find any evidence of the itinerant parents from whom he was supposedly purchased. The entire chain of evidence was built on the testimony of one woman whose reliability was in question. Reluctantly, investigators had to shelve the M theory. It was another promising road that had led to a dead end. Another ghost story to add to the ever-thickening file. As the 20th century drew to a close, a revolution was quietly taking place in forensics. The discovery and application of DNA technology was changing the face of criminal investigation, offering the potential to solve cases that had been cold for decades. For the advocates of the boy in the box, this new science offered a fresh glimmer of hope. In 1998, a team of investigators, including members of the Vidocq Society, a prestigious Philadelphia-based volunteer group of retired forensic professionals who dedicate their time to cracking cold cases, made a momentous decision. They would exhume the boy's body. He had been lying in that potter's field for 41 years. The purpose of the exhumation was singular and futuristic: to obtain a DNA sample. The process was delicate, both physically and emotionally. The small grave was opened, and the boy's remains were carefully exhumed. Scientists at the University of Pennsylvania were able to extract a small amount of mitochondrial DNA, or mtDNA, from the pulp of one of his teeth. At the time, this was a significant achievement. Mitochondrial DNA is passed down exclusively from a mother to all of her children. It's less specific than nuclear DNA, but it can be used to definitively establish or rule out a maternal link between individuals. The boy's mtDNA profile was created and entered into the national DNA databases that existed at the time. The investigators held their breath, hoping for a match, for a connection to a mother or a sibling somewhere in the country who had submitted their own DNA in relation to another crime or missing person case. The result came back negative. There were no matches. It was another crushing setback. The technology had offered a promise, but the boy's genetic secret remained locked away. He was reburied, this time in a new coffin in a donated plot at Ivy Hill Cemetery. A local man paid for a larger headstone. It read, "America's Unknown Child." The ceremony was attended by police officers, investigators, and community members who had been ouched by his story. He was still unknown, but he was not forgotten. For the next 2 decades, the case remained in a state of suspended animation. But something else was happening. The rise of the Internet created a new kind of public square, where the boy's story could be shared and dissected. Websites like America's Unknown Child and countless online forums became virtual headquarters for a dedicated community of amateur sleuths. They proposed new theories, digitized old newspaper clippings, and kept the boy's face in the public consciousness. He seemed destined to remain an eternal mystery, but the science that had failed to give him a name in 1998 was continuing to evolve at a breathtaking pace. The new frontier was a technique with a long name: forensic genetic genealogy. This revolutionary method went far beyond the simple maternal line comparisons of mtDNA. It used a much more detailed analysis of a person's entire genetic code, their nuclear DNA, inherited from both parents. By analyzing hundreds of thousands of specific genetic markers, known as SNPs, genealogists could identify not just parents or siblings, but distant relatives, second cousins, third cousins, fourth cousins once removed. The strategy was to upload an unknown person's DNA profile to public genealogy websites, like GEDmatch and FamilyTreeDNA, where millions of individuals have voluntarily shared their own genetic information to find relatives and explore their ancestry. By finding these distant cousin matches, genealogists could then work backwards, building out vast, complex family trees. The goal was to find a point of intersection, a common set of ancestors, and then build the trees forward again until they found a place where an unknown person, a missing branch on the tree, might fit. It was painstaking, meticulous work, more akin to historical research than traditional police work. It was also the last best hope for the boy in the box. In 2019, with the full support of the Philadelphia Police Department and the District Attorney's Office, the decision was made to try one more time. The boy's body was exhumed for a second time from his grave at Ivy Hill. This time, the goal was to extract a sample of DNA robust enough to build a complete genomic profile. The technology had advanced significantly since 1998. Scientists specializing in ancient and degraded DNA were now able to piece together genetic information from remains that were once considered unusable. They succeeded. After more than 60 years in the ground, the boy yielded his final secret, a full DNA profile. This digital ghost was then handed over to a team of the world's leading genetic genealogists, including Barbara Rae-Venter, the same expert who had famously used the technique to unmask the Golden State Killer. The hunt for the boy's name had entered its final, most technologically advanced chapter. The work of the genealogists was a monumental undertaking that took more than 2 years. After uploading the boy's profile to the genealogy databases, they found what they were hoping for: matches. They were not close relatives, but a collection of distant cousins scattered across the country. This was the starting point. From there, they began the arduous process of building family trees for each of these cousins, tracing their ancestry back through the 19th and 18th centuries, looking for a common set of great-great-grandparents who could link them all together. It was like having 1,000 different puzzle pieces from 1,000 different puzzles, and trying to find the one hidden image they all had in common. They painstakingly traced one side of the family, the maternal line. Through a distant cousin match, They were able to identify a candidate for the boy's birth mother. They researched her entire life, her family, where she lived. Then, using a separate set of cousin matches, they began the same Herculean task on the paternal side. They built another massive family forest, following its branches down through the generations until they arrived at a potential birth father. They now had two names. Two people who had lived in the Philadelphia area in the 1950s. The genealogists had triangulated a single point in history where these two sprawling familles. Y trees intersected. They had found the parents. With this astonishing information, investigators went back to the archives, but this time they weren't searching blindly. They had specific names and a specific date range. They petitioned the courts and obtained an order to unseal the original birth records for a child born to this specific couple. There, in the crisp, clear type of a 1950s government document, was the answer. On December 8, 2022, in a press conference that was watched around the world, the city of Philadelphia finally announced the news that had been 65 years in the making. The boy in the box had a name. He was Joseph Augustus Zarelli. He was born on January 13, 1953. At the time of his death, he had just turned 4 years old. The ghost finally had a history. The revelation of Joseph Augustus Zarelli's name was a profound moment, a seismic shift in a story that had been defined by its central void. For 65 years, the narrative was about the unknown. Now it was about Joseph. The identification provided answers, but it also created a new set of deeply personal and painful questions. Who were his parents, and what had happened to him in the 4 short years of his life? Investigators were cautious with the details they released, mindful of the living relatives who were now grappling with a shocking family history they never knew existed. What they did reveal painted a picture of a troubled, working-class Philadelphia family in the post-war era. Joseph's parents were not married and did not live together. Both went on to have other children, creating a network of half-siblings for Joseph who grew up completely unaware of their lost brother. The families were, by all accounts, stunned by the revelation. The news was a bombshell dropped into the lives of people who were now in their 60s and 70s, forcing them to confront a dark secret from a generation past. Both of Joseph's biological parents were long dead, taking the full story of his life and death with them to their graves. This meant that while the mystery of his identity was solved, the mystery of his murder remained. The identification did, however, allow investigators to re-evaluate the old theories through a new, clearer lens. The M theory, the story of the woman whose mother had purchased a boy named Jonathan, was now definitively ruled out. The boy's name was Joseph, and he was the biological child of a specific Philadelphia couple. The long-held foster home theory, championed for decades by Remington Bristow, also collapsed. There was no apparent connection between the Zarelli family and the Nicoletti foster home. The truth, it seemed, was something entirely different, a private tragedy that played out within the confines of his own biological family. While police have not officially named a suspect, they have stated that their investigation is now focused on this family unit, and that they have their suspicions, but that the person or people responsible are likely deceased. The case is still officially open, but the chances of a criminal prosecution are virtually non-existent. The goal now is not necessarily legal justice, but historical truth, to piece together as much of Joseph's story as possible. What has been pieced together suggests a life lived on the margins. Joseph Augustus Zarelli was born into a world that was unprepared or unwilling to care for him. He was a product of a time when social safety nets were thin, and the stigma surrounding children born outside of marriage was immense. He was, in the most tragic sense, a child who fell through the cracks. The malnourishment and physical scars noted in the 1957 autopsy now had a context. They were not the marks of a single violent event, but the accumulated evidence of a short life of hardship and neglect. He was not a nameless phantom from a ghost story, but a real little boy who experienced pain and fear, and who was ultimately failed by the adults who should have protected him. In January 2023, a new headstone was placed on his grave at Ivy Hill Cemetery. The old inscription, "America's Unknown Child," was gone. In its place, carved into the polished granite, were the words he had been denied for so long: Joseph Augustus Zarelli. The case of Joseph Augustus Zarelli is a study in contrasts. It is a story of profound cruelty and profound dedication. It is a testament to the darkest secrets a family can keep and to the brightest light that relentless investigation can shine. For 65 years, the central question was, who is he? That question has now been answered. But the answer does not erase the tragedy. It sharpens it. It gives the loss a name and a face, transforming an abstract symbol of victimhood into a specific, knowable child whose life had value and meaning. The anatomy of this case is, therefore, the anatomy of an identity itself. An identity is more than just a name on a birth certificate. It is a story, a history, a place within a family and a community. Joseph's identity was stolen from him, first by his killer, and then by the passage of time. The decades-long effort to find his name was a fight to restore that stolen piece of his humanity. It was a refusal to accept that a child's life could be so completely erased. The investigators like Remington Bristow, who chased leads into their old age, the members of the Vidocq Society, who refused to let the case go cold, the genealogists who spent thousands of hours entangling the delicate threads of DNA, they were all, in their own way, identity restorers. They were working to give him back the one thing that is uniquely ours, our name. Modern science provided the key, but it was human perseverance that turned the lock. The DNA profile was just a string of data until the genealogists breathed life into it, connecting it to records of births, marriages, and deaths, and weaving it back into the fabric of a human family. The story of the boy in the box is no longer just a mystery. It is a biography, a short, heartbreaking biography, but a biography nonetheless. It tells us that Joseph Augustus Zarelli was born, he lived for 4 years, and he was murdered. But it also tells us that he was never truly forgotten. He became Philadelphia's child, a silent reminder of the city's capacity for both violence and enduring compassion. The ultimate lesson from this case is that no one is truly anonymous as long as someone is still searching. The science will continue to evolve, and the secrets buried by the past will continue to be unearthed. But the driving force will always be the simple, human need to know, the need to give a name to the nameless, and to speak it aloud. His headstone now stands as a monument, not just to a solved case, but to the enduring power of an identity, proving that even after decades of silence, a name can be spoken again, a story can be told, and a lost child can finally and forever be known. This has been Anatomy of Crime, where the truth is never simple, but always worth seeking.